Japan won some of the most spectacular victories of the early Pacific War. Pearl Harbor, Singapore, the Philippines, Malaya. In months, Japan had built an empire stretching across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. So how did a country that seemed almost unstoppable in 1942 end up surrendering less than 4 years later? The answer wasn't one battle. And it wasn't simply the atomic bomb. Japan repeatedly made decisions that turned military victories into strategic problems. 5 decisions changed the direction of the war. The first mistake was more fundamental. Japan chose to fight a war that depended on winning quickly. Japan had a serious problem. It desperately needed resources. Oil, rubber, iron, raw materials. And Southeast Asia had them. But there was a problem. The United States opposed Japanese expansion. And Japan's leaders increasingly believed that if America entered the war, Japan needed to win quickly. So Japan chose an extraordinary gamble. Attack the United States, cripple its Pacific forces, seize the resources Japan needed, and force America into a negotiated settlement. The plan depended on one assumption: that America would eventually decide the war wasn't worth the cost. But Japan had badly underestimated what it was starting. America wasn't simply another military opponent. It was an industrial power capable of replacing ships, aircraft, weapons, and fuel on a scale Japan could not match. Japan had chosen a war where time itself was the enemy, and that would become the central problem of the entire conflict. The second decision produced one of Japan's greatest victories, and one of its biggest strategic failures. Pearl Harbor was a spectacular tactical success. Japanese aircraft destroyed or damaged major American battleships. But the attack did not accomplish what Japan needed most. It did not remove America's ability to fight. The American aircraft carriers were not in the harbor. Fuel storage and repair facilities survived. And instead of frightening America into negotiation, Pearl Harbor helped produce the opposite reaction. The United States was now fully committed to war. Japan had achieved surprise. But surprise was temporary. American industrial power was not. And Japan had just given its strongest potential enemy a reason to use that power without restraint. The third mistake came after the victories. Japan kept expanding the empire it now had to defend. Then came the victories. The Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma. Japan conquered an enormous territory. But conquest created a new problem. Every victory increased the distance Japan had to defend. More islands, more bases, more shipping routes, more troops, more fuel, more supplies. Japan had captured the resources it needed, but now it had to transport and protect them across an enormous ocean. The empire was becoming harder to defend precisely because it had become so large. Japan was winning territory, but it was also creating an increasingly fragile strategic system. The fourth decision changed something even more important than the number of ships Japan had left. It began losing control of the direction of the war. Then came Midway. Japan wasn't simply trying to win another battle. It wanted to destroy enough American carrier strength to force the United States onto the defensive. Instead, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, and something more important began to disappear: the ability to dictate the direction of the war. Japan could still fight. It could still win individual battles. But increasingly, America was choosing where the next battle would happen. Guadalcanal, the Central Pacific, the Marianas, the Philippines. Japan was no longer expanding the war on its own terms. It was reacting to an enemy with greater industrial depth and growing strategic momentum. Midway didn't make Japan powerless. It made Japan increasingly reactive. The final decision came when Japan's military position was already becoming impossible to recover. By 1945, Japan's position was catastrophic. Its navy had been devastated. Its merchant fleet was collapsing. Its cities were being destroyed by bombing. Its access to fuel and raw materials was severely restricted. And American forces were approaching the Japanese homeland. Yet Japan still had soldiers, aircraft, weapons, and a willingness to continue fighting. Then came the final shock. On August 6th, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. On August 9th, another atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The Japanese leadership now faced a completely transformed situation. The Soviet Union had entered the war. The atomic bomb had demonstrated a terrifying new form of destruction. And continuing the war offered no realistic path back to Japan's former strategic position. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The atomic bombs mattered. The Soviet invasion mattered. The blockade mattered. The bombing mattered. And the collapse of Japan's military position mattered. But the deeper story began years earlier. Japan had entered a war it could not sustain. It mistook tactical victories for strategic security. It expanded an empire it struggled to defend. It lost the initiative. And then it continued fighting after the strategic balance had turned decisively against it. Japan didn't lose World War II because it suddenly became weak. It lost because its victories kept creating problems that its enemies had greater resources to solve. And eventually, there were no victories left that could reverse the direction of the war.